Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. Joining us is political commentator and senior fellow at the Pepperdine School of Public Policy in California, Bruce Herschensohn, a former Senate candidate. He is the author of a brand new book, An American Amnesia: How the U.S. Congress Forced the Surrenders of South Vietnam and Cambodia. Welcome to Newsmax TV, Mr. Herschensohn.
Thanks, Kathleen. Good to be here.
First, congratulations on the book. Earlier this month, Senators John McCain and John Kerry and former President Clinton celebrated 15 years of diplomatic relations with Vietnam. And some 40 years after the Vietnam War, your book fills in details that you say that historians and the media left out. The book makes the case that the 94th Congress caused us to lose in Vietnam by default. Explain, if you will.
I can. We won the war on January the 23rd of 1973. President Nixon made a speech to the nation, and by winning, I mean that we had achieved everything that Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon wanted to achieve. We got the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong to sign an agreement called the Paris Peace Accords, in which we called it a ceasefire, much more than a ceasefire. It was much more, not just an end of aggression. The Congress was not at all pleased about our win, our victory. Either were a lot of college professors, either were the demonstrators. A lot of people weren't happy with it because they had an investment in our failure. And the last thing they wanted us to do was to win. And the Congress spent the next 2¼ years to make sure that they could defeat the victory that we had. And they did. They took that provision about piece by piece and they thought, this is where we come into the act. We're the ones who supply the appropriations. The president doesn't, we do. And we're not going to appropriate any money, and we're going to tag amendments onto every bill that comes through Congress and make sure that they don't get it. And they achieved it.
Now, earlier you talked about an investment in failure, Congress's investment in failure. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure, they had made their reputations, a decade of reputations, by saying, we can't win. We should never have been there in the first place. The South Vietnamese are crummy fighters. They had that investment. They used to talk to demonstrations in which kids would be holding the Viet Cong flag and the flag of North Vietnam. If they had an American flag, it would be upside down. They had an investment. They had their reputations at stake, a decade of reputation, and they didn't want us to win. And we did. And least of all, good Lord, they didn't want it to be President Nixon who did it, but that's the way it was.
Mr. Herschensohn, are we making the same mistakes in Afghanistan, and are we in danger of succumbing to a similar voluntary amnesia, as you've called it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are doing exactly, it is almost as though the 111th Congress is trying to duplicate what the 94th Congress did. They want a withdrawal date. Many of them do. There were over 100 co-sponsors just a couple of weeks ago on an amendment to a bill, just the way the 94th Congress did it, and in this case, a withdrawal from Afghanistan. And what the 94th Congress did was really make it possible and probable and doable for a genocide of Southeast Asia. Millions killed. More were killed in the peace, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, of Southeast Asia than in a decade of war. That is what the 111th Congress very likely could achieve regarding Afghanistan. And the demonstrations are now scheduled too, to get out of there. And we're, to have this history behind us and not learn anything from it is, to me, absolutely incredible.
This week, we learned of one of the largest unauthorized disclosures in military history. Classified military documents regarding the Afghan war were revealed on WikiLeaks.com. How does this compare to the Pentagon Papers link, and what do you see as the consequences for President Obama and our troops?
It is a direct link to the Pentagon Papers, and I heard some people who call themselves experts talk about this, and they said, no, the Pentagon Papers had to do with the administration of the time. This has to do really with the past administration. The Pentagon Papers had nothing to do with the administration of the time. It was basically those things that happened during the Johnson administration, and it was released during the Nixon administration. The reason the Nixon administration was unhappy about it was because a lot of things were revealed that happened during the Johnson administration that would make it terribly difficult for us during the Nixon administration. Same thing true here. If they're talking about past administration, and of course they are when they're talking about, particularly about the ISI in Pakistan, the Interstate Intelligence Agency, that stuff was known for a long time about the ISI in Pakistan being in cahoots with the Taliban. But what they revealed apparently, and I have to say apparently because I haven't read all the thousands of pages, what they revealed were a lot of things that could endanger our troops, could endanger NATO troops, could endanger civilians in Afghanistan. And we could turn over, good Lord, it could all result that we turn over the Afghanistan nation back to the Taliban.
The papers present a much more grim picture of the war. Have U.S. officials been giving an accurate portrayal of the war in Afghanistan, in your opinion?
In my opinion, yes. There are those things that are kept from the public, and I'm darn glad they do. There are those things that are none of my business. We want to win a war. Compare it with a war that we did win, World War II. Good Lord, the secrets were kept. Journalists would never. This would be considered, what happened last week would be considered treason if it had happened during World War II.
Senator John Kerry suggested that the administration needed to make calibrations to get the Afghan and Pakistan policies right. Looking toward the past and what happened with Vietnam, what calibrations do you think the U.S. needs to make now in order to win in Afghanistan?
We have to have the objective of winning the war and not cry if we do, as so many did when the surrenders occurred of South Vietnam and Cambodia. We have to have that objective. There wasn't anyone in the United States during World War II. I remember it well, even though I was just a little kid, but boy, do I remember it well. No one talked about a timeline. No one talked about fighting it politically correct, about endangering civilians. Look what we did in Dresden, the UK and the US in 2 days. There were something like 25,000 residences in Dresden before the attack. There were 2,000 left afterwards. Look what we did to Tokyo. Look what we did to Berlin, to Hiroshima, Nagasaki. But we won, and it's called the greatest generation because it was the greatest generation. There was only one thing that could loosely be classified as a timeline. That was victory. We are going to win this war. And I might add to that, the last fiscal year of the war, the budget for defense was 89.5% of the entire federal budget. 10.5% for everything else, and no one complained.
All right, the book is called An American Amnesia. Bruce Herschensohn, congratulations on the book, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Kathleen.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.